Introducing Brian Leedman, who is the chairman of Neurotech International. ASX code is NTI. And Neurotech is a medical device and solutions company conducting clinical studies to assess the neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory and neuro-modulatory activities of its proprietary NTI Dolce cannabis strains. Brian will provide an update on the company's operations, including the phase 1-2 clinical study conducted at Monash Children's Hospital of its proprietary cannabis strains. And the study, by way of background, it's the first time that the full spectrum lower than 0.3% natural THC medicinal cannabis strains are being assessed in children with autism spectrum disorder. And in fact, an update's just gone out to market this morning on the trial. So I'm sure Brian will talk to that. So with that, it looks like we've got our screen sharing going already, and I will hand over to Brian. Thank you, Brian.
Excellent. Thank you, Jane. And thank you for having me today. And so, it's my privilege to be able to present Neurotech to you today, and also talking about the clinical pathways and what's changing and what's moving. And I think that in case of Neurotech, and basically I'm going to do that through this presentation. And it's interesting that cannabis has been around for thousands of years. It's been used medicinally by peoples and societies over a very long period of time. But it's really in the last 100 years that cannabis has been demonized, effectively, being called marijuana. It's something that has prevented the clinical development of cannabis in a whole range of different potential areas for various therapeutics, and because of that, cannabis has been hasn't been conducted in clinical trials for an extended period of time. When you think about opioids, they make up the vast majority of drugs that are commercialized today, but they've been undergone clinical studies for most part of the last 100 years. That's resulted in many, many different drugs that are approved and generate lots of revenue for the companies that have developed them. Now, cannabis hasn't, and that is a shame, because there are tremendous medical benefits that can be unlocked from the cannabis plant. So Neurotech is one of those companies. And if you think about the Australian Stock Exchange, there's the first company that was actually listed on the ASX that was cannabis, or that is cannabis, was BW Pharma, I think it was called, and it was back in 2015. So not a very long time ago. Neurotech is one of those companies that is absolutely focused on commercialization of the medicinal properties of cannabis. And we are unique, and as Jane mentioned at the start, we're the only cannabis company that actually has an exclusive license to cannabis strains that have less than 0.3% THC. And that's a really important figure to remember, because as far as the regulatory bodies are concerned, if the cannabis has greater than 0.3% THC, then it's considered a narcotic. And that's going to prevent, I guess, some widespread adoption of the whatever drug it is that's been developed from the cannabis plant, because if you, let's say that this drug is approved and then you move into commercializing it, then you could have people that are driving their car, they could be busted for driving under the influence. You could have people who fly in, fly out workers that are getting drug tested, or even kids, if you're approved for a drug for children, you don't want to send your kids off to school stoned. So this is a major problem. We don't, but except for us, because we don't have that problem. It's a natural product. It's less than 0.3% THC. And we don't have to chemically extract the THC from the plant in order to produce our product, because it's naturally that way. Now, it's not just the plant, so in terms of the lack of THC in our particular strains that's most important. It's actually the specific properties of the strain that we have. And we've licensed this strain for all applications in neurological disorders. So we own it 100%. No one else can use it. I'm sure many would love to, but they can't, because we've got that exclusive right. And it's the anti-inflammatory properties that our particular strains possess that's most interesting in science. And so then we're doing a number of preclinical studies, and now we've moved into clinical studies in autism spectrum disorder in Melbourne. I'll talk about that at Monash Children's Hospital shortly. But it's really the anti-inflammatory properties that have demonstrated the particular need for development of drugs that can be used using this, and particularly for neurological disorders like autism, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, ADHD, and so forth. So we're well advanced in terms of our preclinical work and now having moved into human trials. If you consider the company in a corporate snapshot, relatively low market cap at $27 odd million, but we're well funded, $4.83 million in the bank, and we're not looking to do any capital raisings anytime soon, certainly not this year and possibly not even next year. So we're certainly well funded, and we are looking to produce a lot of news flow going forward as we produce these results in our clinical trial. So moving into the board, we have the highly experienced board. I came on about October, and I'm really there to promote the company and tell everyone what we're doing in terms of moving forward. I've got a good background in biotech. People would know me from other companies that I've either founded or co-founded, notably Oncosul Medical was my first one. Imaging Limited, now capped at $1.7 billion. It's amazing. Roger Aston, Paul Hopper, and I floated that company about 7 years ago. Nutritional Growth Solutions, I'm the chairman of that, and I was chairman of Neuroscientific Biopharmaceuticals, and so these are the companies that I've been involved in. Krista Bates recently joined the board. She's a corporate lawyer. Highly experienced. She was head of the cannabis group at Leedman Legal. She's a great mind and a great addition to our board. More recently than that, we had Professor Alan Cripps, who joined our board, Professor Emeritus at Monash. He's a very experienced, I should say Griffith, a very experienced clinician, scientist, and a great mind, and providing direction for us as we move forward in terms of commercializing our particular strains. We also have Mark Davies and Winton Willisey. They were on the board prior to myself. They're both corporate identities, great experience in capital raising and corporate markets. So that makes up the board. Now, moving on to the medicinal cannabis industry, it's really just getting started. There's only been 4 drugs based on cannabis that have ever been approved by the regulatory bodies. And that's remarkable, considering that everybody knows that cannabis has great medicinal properties, but because of, as I outlined at the beginning of the presentation, due to its criminality associated with it, there's been not much incentive to do clinical trials. Now, clearly that is changing. We're seeing a shift from criminalization to decriminalization, and hopefully then legalization of cannabis. And we're seeing that in various states in the United States, but also in Canada, and also moving in Australia as well. So there obviously is a lot of focus and interest in the cannabis space, because the market knows that when decriminalization is completed, there will be a huge market opportunity to commercialize these products. But if you look at that chart and see that, in terms of the market size in the US legal marijuana market, as I like to call it cannabis in any case, you can see that's growing. But what's interesting is the opioid market is actually starting to decline. And that's because there are serious side effects associated with opioids, including overdose and death. It's interesting to note that there's never been a recorded fatality using cannabis ever from the plant itself. That's never happened. So we know that cannabis is a very safe drug. Now, it's interesting, if you're going to develop drugs through clinical trials to treat various illnesses, safety is obviously the #1 concern. And when you've got a drug that we already know is safe, it's actually pretty easy or simplified to go through the hospital approval, ethics approval process, because the hospital's already established and know that the cannabis plant is safe. And so you don't have to do a huge amount of preclinical safety work in terms of getting your product to market. Efficacy is going to be the standard by which these drugs are then approved. And, in terms of taking drugs through the process of development through to commercialization, it can be 5 to 10 years. That's typical because you have to establish safety, and safety can take a long time. But there is a far quickened process with respect to cannabis simply because we know the drug is safe. Now, there is a huge market that we can tackle here in terms of treating neurological disorders, and they are largely an unmet market. I mean, starting off with traumatic brain injury, it's a huge future target for us. Not well met by current and existing drugs that also, I might add, have some very significant side effects. Same goes with multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, migraines, not well met markets at all. Autism spectrum disorder is a particularly difficult market and very not well met at all by the existing drugs, particularly for children, the side effects associated with it. This is not an easy target that we have chosen to be our primary target for our unique strains in cannabis. And yet that's what we're going after, because the preclinical work has demonstrated that the anti-inflammatory properties and all these inflammatory diseases, these are the benefits that's going to be associated with our particular treatment for autism. And it's a massive, massive market for us to pursue. And we're already well advanced in our phase 2 clinical trial and then moving into the phase 3, which I'll talk about. In terms of the unique strains of CBD alone, it's all about this anti-inflammatory, as I mentioned, and the particular cannabinoids that is the key ingredient in the cannabis plant. Most people think that it's THC. It's not. It's the cannabinoids that are the key ingredient that scientifically and medically that everybody's interested in. And being able to regulate and suppress the inflammation by acting on arginase 1 is a really interesting outcome from it. But I want to surmise this table into something really simple, and that is what we've demonstrated is that our cannabis strains actually increase cell energy. And cell energy is really the key to healthy living for humans. As we get older, cell energy decreases. And what we demonstrate in our preclinical studies, uniquely compared to CBD alone, our strains increase cell energy, which is really critical in terms of being able to treat various disorders. And that's a key finding for us. Moving into these preclinical studies, these are the outcomes of those things where we actually showed an increase, or should I say, demonstrate reduction in brain cell inflammation by up to 60% compared to CBD alone. And CBD alone is the standard. There's been quite a bit of work done on that, so we have to compare ourselves to that standard. And that's what we've demonstrated here in terms of the anti-inflammatory properties, reducing cell inflammation by up to 60%. Also, in terms of increasing overall brain self and viability by up to 80%. These are terrific outcomes that have demonstrated in our preclinical studies, which gave us the confidence to then move into our human trials. In terms of that pathway, so we've done our in vitro assessments. We're doing, well, we have done, should I say, the product formulation and dose profiling. It's a pretty simple thing. We're taking the cannabis that we're growing at facilities in New South Wales. The oil's simply been compressed out of the plant. They add a little bit of bulking to it, which is olive oil, and put it into a metered dose, and that's what we're giving to children. So we've got all that done, and now we're in that phase 2 clinical trial. What I'm quite excited about in particular is that we're not doing the trial just anywhere. It's being done at Monash Children's Hospital. It's the most prestigious paediatric hospital in Australia, certainly the Southern Hemisphere. And it's been done under the guidance of Associate Professor Michael Fay. He is really the font of knowledge when it comes to autism spectrum disorder. He's very excited about being associated with this study. And we're really in the later stages of it. 20 kids were enrolled. We could have enrolled 50 or more. There was such demand to be part of this particular trial. And it's all about assessing key behavioural changes in these children. So we have a team of psychologists. They are reviewing the trial on a weekly basis. Now, we have met some hurdles with respect to COVID. There's been some delays, not great. It's probably about 3 or 4 weeks overall in terms of the delay in the outcome of completing that trial. I did think that we would probably be finished in October. It's now going to be in November. So unfortunately, COVID has impacted us in that way, but not a great extent. And we will be releasing the results of that trial in November, and that will then allow us to then move into the phase 3, which you can see from today's announcement. We're already well prepared in moving forward. So clearly we're obviously happy with the way this trial is progressing, albeit that we'll have to wait to see the final results. And why are we targeting autism? Well, in terms of clinical need and new trends and movements in this space, if you look at the drugs that are treating ASD, drugs like Ritalin, these are not nice drugs. They have significant side effects. I've outlined some of these here as well in terms of appetite loss, irritability, nausea, insomnia. You don't really want your kids to have to go through those sort of side effects, but clearly these drugs have some efficacy, but with the side effects associated with it. Imagine having a drug such as ours, if we can show efficacy in the treatment of autism spectrum disorder in children, which is incredible if you can achieve that based on the clinical outcomes. The psychologists say that the kid's behavior is changed for the better. Then we're talking about a blockbuster type of drug, one that can replace the standard treatment. I like to call it as a bio-better. There's two types of drugs in this world. There's a biosimilar and a bio-better. Yeah, you can make money being a biosimilar, but you can make tremendous money being a bio-better. And this potentially is a bio-better drug than what's currently out there, simply because you've got your efficacy, if we can establish that, and we already know it's safe. So you don't have any of these side effects associated with the cannabis treatment. And we're the first company in the world to be doing this. So this is going to be hopefully a groundbreaking outcome in the study, and we'll be very excited to moving into that phase 3. Now, commercialization is interesting because there are 3 clear markets. There's prescription, nutraceutical, and pharmaceutical. Prescription is really just being prescribed by the doctor, and doctors are increasingly taking up the mantle in terms of treating cannabis for various disorders. You can make money from that, but it's not a huge market because it needs to be pharmaceutical to achieve that potential blockbuster. And that's what we're going for. We want to have regulatory approval specifically for various disorders, including ASD. The nutraceutical one is interesting because if you look at the over-the-counter things, obviously you need regulatory approval for that, and or should I say not regulatory, you do need regulatory, but you need parliamentary approval for that, and that's actually happening right now in Australia. We expect it to be completely passed and ready by the end of this calendar year, which is very soon. So a lot of cannabis companies are making a lot of noise about the nutraceutical space. We'll be making noise about that in the nutraceutical space, particularly because our strains are unique. They naturally have less than 0.3% THC. If you are a nutraceutical company, like say a Blackmores, for example, I don't think they want to be selling or promoting products that are synthetic, that have had the THC extracted chemically from that product. It's no longer a natural product. And they're interested in natural products, and so are we. And that's why we think that we've got a unique offering to the nutraceutical companies when they start selling these type of products, which they certainly will be going into next year. And I think we're going to have some significant news to talk about next year in respect to that. In terms of strategic partners, what a great list of partners we have in Monash Health, RMIT, Monash University, Canada Pacific is our grower, Althea, the Walter Eliza Hall Institute, ACS Lab. These are all great companies for us to be associated with. Clearly, we are different in the uniqueness of our strains, and they want to work with us. And we're very proud to have these partners taking us forward. Just closing off in terms of news flow. So we've already achieved a number of our milestones already met now. The big one is going to be the final results. We always said it was in the 4th quarter. My guess it's going to be November. That's what we say in the announcement today. Hopefully sooner and earlier than later in November. Well, we'll see. When the results are ready, we'll publish them. And then we'll certainly be expanding that study. There's a lot to do in terms of preparing for your phase 3. Paperwork that has to be done in terms of expanding your patient numbers, further assessment tools as recommended by the neuropsychologist. So we're well advanced in doing all that work. and also looking into expanding into other indications. And again, that was also detailed in today's announcement. We're certainly looking at pain, concussion, and orphan indications as well. So there are a number of areas that we want to expand into in moving forward. And then, of course, that's all in preparation of that multi-cohort phase 3. It's going to start in the first quarter of next year. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of that, but we're well advanced in that. The key to this is obviously in production as well. That's why we have the Canada Pacific partner. So we're really ramping up supplies of our cannabis strains, getting ready for that phase 3 and the potential for the over-the-counter nutraceutical opportunities that we're pursuing. So that's my presentation. I hope I've been able to shed some light in respect to new trends in this sector, particularly on the clinical side, and the need for new types of treatments. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Brian, for a great presentation. I might just get you to stop your screen share now so that we can see you on screen. And we do have a number here ready to go. So if the trial shows positive results in reduced inflammation within the brain cell, do you think this could be used as a potential preventative drug?
Well, it's interesting because I talked about that increase in the cell energy that we demonstrated. So obviously you have to do all that work in the preclinical space before you can actually expect the certain outcomes in your clinical trial. But yes, the answer is, I believe that you can as a preventative treatment. That's probably a big thing in the nutraceutical space. The nutraceutical companies aren't that interested in clinical trial results. They've got a far lower hurdle in terms of getting things over the counter. And in other words, as long as the product is safe, you don't really have to prove your claims. So on the nutraceutical side, I think it's a preventative, yes. On the pharmaceutical side, clinical trials would have to be established to prove that. That can take a long time. That's something that we may well be able to show over some period of years, that there was a preventative nature to it, and may well be. But I think the nutraceutical market is the one that will be pursuing that particular objective.
Okay. And on the pharmaceutical side, it's the sort of thing that you'd have to study over a longer period to form that view. Yeah. Okay, great. So on similar vein, so you mentioned pain and concussion, but also the anti-inflammatory nature of the drug. Have you looked at other inflammatory indications like arthritis or psoriasis, for instance?
No, well, I can't say that we've specifically done studies in that respect, but we're certainly doing stuff in multiple sclerosis, and we've made some statements around that, and clearly that's going to be one that we will be pursuing clinically. But in terms of arthritis, obviously that is a potentially huge market. I think what we find is that being a relatively small biotechnology company, you've really got to pick your winners, and you can't just pursue everything. And I do get that a lot about, what about this and what about that? And the reality is that what I think will probably happen for the company is that we will pick certain winners that we think that we can pursue with the funds that we have and potentially can get down the track, and then let the big farmers come in and say, right, well done, you've established that it's safe, you've proven efficacy in anti-inflammatory diseases, we'll take it from here, and I'll be very happy to negotiate an acquisition by Pfizer, Merck, or so and so down the line, and they can pursue those opportunities.
You've just given us some insight into the end game as well, once again, so that's good. Okay, so, and you mentioned MS a minute ago, so related question, you've spoken a lot about the ASD trial, but do you have any kind of update that you can provide on the MS side of things? I
can't have an update for you right here on your exclusive opportunity in front of us, but I can tell you that there is going to be news flow, particularly in respect to MS. So there's been a lot of work that's been done. And as I mentioned in today's announcement, we have some updates coming. So I'm actually expecting to enter into a very exciting news flow period for the company. While not only, obviously, investors should be very focused on the outcome of that phase 2, because that's a major catalyst for share price appreciation. But There's also multiple sclerosis studies that we're doing, and there will be results that will be coming out on that. I should say that part of the whole thing, and we mentioned this for the first time in this announcement, is all about the IP position. So there's a lot of intellectual property that we've had to get sorted. So we've actually been a bit quiet on news flow simply because we had to have our intellectual property patents filed before we could publicly talk about these things. I'm expecting that we will be announcing the completion of that intellectual property filings, perhaps maybe by the end of next week. And that, I think, will be the catalyst for all this new news flow that's going to come out. We've got to be very careful that we can protect the work that our scientists are doing.
Absolutely. Okay. I think you certainly covered this, but I'll ask the question in case it got missed. So if the phase 2 trial results are good, will you immediately move to a phase 3?
Absolutely. So we're gearing up for that phase 3 right now. One of the biggest hurdles that we need to overcome is simply the sheer quantity of product that we need to produce for a phase 3. So we're talking going from, say, a factor of 10 in terms of size of trial, from 20 to 200. And then, so we have to do that, but we're already doing that. So we're actually investing significantly in the supplies that we need for that. And that's going to be the major precursor. And there's obviously a lot of paperwork and so forth associated with ethics approvals in the hospitals and so forth, but largely that's taken care of by the results of the phase 2 trial. We certainly need to be able to have the sufficient product to meet that, and that's what we're investing in. I'm confident we will have that done. So I don't see any delays in moving into that phase 3. We'll move straight into it and also pursue other disease indications. And I mentioned orphan drugs as something that we could potentially go after as a low fruit opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, I know you did mention funding earlier, but we've got a question here specifically around the phase 3. So the question is, do you feel you're funded for the phase 3 trial?
I guess I'm going to have to wait and see what the clinical team come back with in terms of numbers. Obviously, a phase 3 is going to be significantly more expensive than the phase 2. But given that we have such a strong position right now, moving now into the completion of the phase 2, I don't see that we need to raise funds, but I will wait and see the numbers. Of course, being relatively small public companies, it's always a factor in the share price as well, and we tend to be opportunistic when opportunities come. So I'm not ruling it out, but I think that on the back of a positive phase 2, I think that we'll get a re-rate, and that can lead to all kinds of opportunities. If a particularly large fund was keen to take a position in the company, I wouldn't be looking to prevent that.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Brian. It's great timing that we've got you here today after you've put out this announcement this morning. A reminder to everyone, the code is NTI if you'd like to go and check out that announcement that Brian mentioned today. And we're coming up to an inflection point by all accounts. So keep an eye on what's going on with Neurotech International. Thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to watching things progress.
It's a great opportunity, and I appreciate you giving me the chance to present.